What are views and materialized views? Well, a materialized view is really data warehousing, so we're not going to go too far into it, but we need to explain the difference. A view uses a stored SQL statement to repeatedly execute itself against underlying data. So it's a query, a stored query, which whenever you read the view, which has its own object name, it will execute that underlying query. With a materialized view, it actually creates a copy of underlying data, and when you read the materialized view later on, it will read that copy. There are additional aspects with materialized views which will allow Oracle to automatically read the materialized view even when you're reading a query against a bunch of tables. Whatever the materialized view is built on, Oracle can automatically redivert a query to a materialized view. That's the benefit of materialized views, in that you can actually aggregate a huge structure of data in a data warehouse down to 1% of its size, so that when you run a query that does an aggregation, for instance with a group by, and the materialized view is a group by as well, Oracle will automatically rewrite the query internally and tell it to read 1% of the I/O that it normally would. Now, if you're reading gigabytes and terabytes of data, that can make an enormous difference in speed, particularly in warehouses. They're not so much used in OLTP databases, more likely to be used in reporting functions and warehousing functions. Let's get back to views. So what can we do with a view? We can create a view, we can alter a view, and we can drop a view. So let's go and look in the manuals at views. So let's find the master book list, and let's find the SQL language reference, which is right here, and let's find the word view. We get all sorts of other things. Alter view we're interested in, create view we're interested in, and drop view. So let's go and find create view and have a quick look at it. We don't want to go through too much of the syntax. There is a lot of syntax involved with views, but a lot of it is very advanced and far too complicated for now, such as create, object views, XML type views, inline outline constraints. You can actually create a view that can be updatable. I don't recommend using those because later on your performance could be drastically affected. I have seen entire databases created out of views, and what happens is the whole thing gets locked up and your performance can actually halt in the long term. Don't overuse views. They're allowed and created to give you a subset picture of data. You don't want to run something like a group by aggregation for a view because it's always going to read the underlying table data anyway. It may be able to read a materialized view if it exists, but if it doesn't, it executes that query constantly and consistently. And if you've got multiple people sharing the views and the underlying data, and you've got multiple layers of hierarchical view structures, eventually your database is just going to lock up. Use tables, use views sparingly, and also use materialized views when you actually want to do separate I/O sections of reading of data. Be very careful using views. However, that said, in recent versions of Oracle, the optimizer can actually optimize against a view and pass that optimization down into the query contained in the view, allowing it to read the data that the table reads. For instance, with the tables filtering. In days past, a view, if you applied a where clause to a view, it would still read everything that the query inside the view read, and then it would filter it at the view level. So you'd read all the data and then have a where clause that pulled one record from 5 million, where normally you'd read one record from the table structure. From the view, you would read 5 million rows and then apply the filter and take one from 5, and you do a lot more work. Views are very simple. In its simplest form, a view simply says create, or replace if it already exists, the view with the view name, wherever you want to create it, as a subquery. Pretty simple. If you want to alter a view, if we click on alter view really allows you to change the view without changing the query. And it gets into constraints and primary keys and all sorts of interesting things on a view. The only thing I generally do with a view quite often is to alter view and recompile it. What that does is it passes the SQL statement within the view. It will validate the SQL statement within the view. So if something such as a table's been dropped, something's gone missing, the view may not recompile and it may not execute. So when you run a query against the view, it will basically produce an error. You don't want it to do that. One way to do that is to recompile the view, which will again pass and compile and check, semantically check the query inside the view. And obviously dropping a view is as simple as that. Just drop the view. You can cascade constraints, but that applies to views that have constraints in them. I don't want to go into views with constraints and views that are updatable at this point. I don't particularly actually approve of them because it can get really complicated, and I would prefer to advise using basic tables and materialized views rather than have extensive use of views, and particularly updatable and constraint containing views. They do have their place, but in my 25 years of experience, I've never seen them used effectively. Basic views are simple. Keep them simple. Keep it simple, stupid. Complex views with updatable constraints and data rows updatable from views, it gets a little bit too complicated and you can tie yourself in huge knots using those. So just be cautious using them.